Picture a courtroom so quiet. You could hear the slightest noise, the soft rustle of papers, the groan of a chair, the light click of a pen against the wood bench the judge occupied. It was not one of those movie courtrooms with gun-toting drama and shouting and fist slamming. No, this was not like that. The quietness here was heavy, as if everyone in the room held their breath, wondering how the tale would end. And at the heart of that quietness stood Kody Brown. For years, millions of Americans had sat at home watching him on Sister Wives, boldly leading his big plural family, causing controversy and sometimes chaos. But this was not about the cameras, the debates from the fans, or even the lifestyle he was so often criticized for. This was about something much more intimate. It was about love. It was about responsibility. And above all, it was about the children. Kody wasn't in trouble. He wasn't defending his way of life from the law, like he had previously done. This wasn't a battle over property, finances, or TV shows. Rather, the case began in something any parent can relate to: the need to protect and claim as own the children whom you love. He wasn't fighting for himself, he was fighting for Robyn Brown's 3 kids from her former marriage: Dayton, Aurora, and Brianna. For years, viewers had heard Kody speak of oneness. He'd remind them, again and again, that in a plural family, all the children belong to all the parents, that love be multiplied, not divided. It was a beautiful, poetic-sounding thing. But come on, words are easier than action, and actions are easier than legislation. And here, in this court, Kody had to make his vision of family hold water in the real world. The burden of it all was evident in the tension in which he sat, shoulders rigid, jaw set. Robyn sat in close proximity, eyes brimming with soft tears. She was not merely Kody's 4th wife. She was a mother seeking to ensure the future of her children. Audiences had grown used to seeing her speak softly and crying, but here, in court, that softness was exaggerated. To her, this wasn't mere legal forms. This was closing one door in her children's lives and opening another one completely. And the stakes, higher than most viewers watching at home ever knew. Adoption isn't a matter of signing on the line. It ain't easy to say, "I love these children, so they are mine." In the eyes of the law, adoption is serious business. It cuts one legal bond and forms another. It poses tough questions. Is this really in the best interest of the children? Does the biological parent want, or even emotionally need, to take a step back? And is the adoptive parent prepared for all of the lifelong obligations that come with the label dad? For Dayton, Aurora, and Brianna, these weren't simply grown-up discussions. These were choices that would impact every aspect of their lives: where they fit in, who would be able to make medical choices for them, even how they felt when they signed their last names on homework assignment. To the kids, Kody was already a father. He was the man they shared their life with, the one who was showing them the way of daily life in the busy, at times frenzied Brown house. But to the law, he wasn't yet. That difference between what was real in their hearts and what was real in the books was the reason why everyone was in this courtroom today. Let's stop here for a second. Think about how many families across America have faced this same struggle: step-parents stepping into the role of parent, loving a child deeply, yet running into the brick wall of paperwork and legal technicalities. For many in the audience, especially viewers in their 50s and beyond, this wasn't just reality TV drama. This was relatable. Maybe you've lived it yourself, or maybe you've seen it in your own family. That's why this scene in Sister Wives resonated so deeply. Kody, routinely criticized as selfish or overly controlling, appeared different here. This wasn't ego. This was about solidifying his relationship with 3 kids who already considered him dad. In a sense, this was his opportunity to show, not merely to the audience, not merely to his wives, but to himself, that when he used the term family, he meant what he said. The room was that day full of silent intensity. The lawyers talked in hushed, measured words, every word carefully weighed, but all knew the unspoken truth: the ruling would change lives forevermore. The judge peered down from the bench, not only at Kody, not only at Robyn, but at the children whose destinies hung on the ruling. And this is where the narrative tugs at the heartstrings. For Kody, it wasn't just about adding children to his moniker. It was about eliminating ambiguity. If something ever did happen, medical issues, school forms, even something as mundane as signing a permission slip, without this adoption, there would always be issues, always the presence of something that wasn't finished. Robyn understood this as well. Her previous marriage had long since ended, but the contractual bonds remained, a shadow that would not dissipate. She desired her children to feel safe, to understand that they belonged fully to the Brown family, with no questions asked, no doubts at all. She wanted them to perceive Kody as their father-in-law, and in reality, and not only as a stepfather in reality. And for the kids, well, they did not require legal speak to realize what it was. Children sense belonging in their hearts. They sense when they are really claimed, and they knew that this court fight was about something more than documents. It was about whether or not the man whom they considered dad would be theirs forever. In that silent courtroom, the feelings were greater than the walls could contain. It was the sort of moment where reality TV crossed over into real life, and for once, the drama wasn't crafted for cameras. It was real, it was raw, and it was a reminder that beneath the headlines and the episodes, this was a family flawed, messy but very human battling for what they felt was right. So when we reflect on that day, it wasn't just another narrative, it was a turning point. A moment in which the hush of the courtroom was louder than any words could have been. Kody Brown sat there, not as the showy star of Sister Wives, not as the guy so often accused of playing favorites or being a poor leader, but just as a dad, ready to do whatever it took to ensure his kids' future. And that, above all, was why the stakes seemed so impossibly high. If we want to truly know why this adoption was such a transformative tipping point, we have to go back in time and examine the road that got here. Because this wasn't something that occurred suddenly. This was years in the making, a tale spun with former heartache, judicial hurdles, and the profound aspiration for a safer future. Before she ever joined the Brown family, Robyn Brown led a life very different from the one she lives now. She was previously married to David Jessup. Her 3 children, Dayton, Aurora, and Brianna, were the result of that marriage. As is the case with so many young mothers who end up in troubled marriages, Robyn ultimately decided to leave. It wasn't an easy decision, but she knew she had to step out for herself and for her children. When she eventually met Kody and joined the Sister Wives family, she didn't arrive on an empty slate. She brought along not only her own aspirations and hopes of a better future, but also these 3 little children. And if you've ever lived in a blended family, you know it's a game changer. Love has to stretch now, roles have to adjust, and although people can say, we're one big happy family, the truth is not always that way. On the show, the Browns themselves tended to call their stepkids bonus children. It was their gesture of informing us that love in the family was not defined by bloodlines. It was lovely on television, and to a certain extent the message was genuine. But life is not always well defined. Legally, Robyn's children still had a dad, and his name was David Jessup. And this is where the adoption road became so complex. In America, adoption laws are exceedingly straightforward. A child can't be adopted by a new parent unless the birth parent consents to ending his or her rights. That isn't a modest step. That means the birth parent must voluntarily step away, legally severing their claim on the child. After those rights are relinquished, they're lost forever. In order for Kody to obtain Robyn's 3 kids, David would need to sign away his legal rights as their father. Without that action, there was no option but for the couple to continue down a toxic path. The judge could not simply wave his hand and say, "These children are now Browns." That's not the way the system functions. The law is there to safeguard the rights of the biological parent, even in cases where the relationships are strained or broken. Now in theory, it made sense, but anyone who has gone through it can tell you family is never paperwork. This was about history, about feelings, about pride, and about what it means to be a parent. For David, it meant coming to terms with the fact that another man wanted to legally replace him. To Robyn, it also meant going back to the hurt of a failed marriage, and doing so while she was trying to maintain her children's sense of security. And for Kody, this was the time when words had to turn into action. For years he had talked about family togetherness, about how all the children in his household were his children, born or wed. But talking about it at dinner time, or in front of a television audience was one thing. Walking into a courthouse to make it a legal affair, that was something else entirely. Robyn, in a low-key manner, had frequently said how much she wished for this. She wished her kids to be secure, to feel completely included by the Brown family. In interviews she spoke of her concerns. What if something occurred to her? What if choices required to be made regarding the kids within school or medical crisis situation? Without adoption, the choices might be muddled, delayed, or even removed from her control. And then there was the emotional realm. As much as Robyn loved Kody, as much as she trusted him with her children, she desired that her children sense it as well. She desired that they understand, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they had a father who had chosen them, claimed them, not merely in day-to-day existence, but in the indelible vocabulary of the law. For Kody, the test was intimate. He wasn't merely filling in for Robyn, he was stepping up for 3 kids who had already begun to regard him as a dad. Every dinner at the family table, every school function, every tuck-in at bedtime, they'd formed a relationship. But legally, he was a stranger. And for a man who frequently spoke of himself as the head of his home, that was insufficient. He desired that the law acknowledge what was already in his heart. Of course, looming in the background was the specter of David Jessup. How would he react? Would he battle for his father's rights? Or would he stand aside and let Kody fill the gap? Viewers at home agonized about it endlessly. Some asked themselves whether Kody had the right to embrace this role, while others thought it was the obvious next step. But in court, discussions were irrelevant. There was one thing alone: David's choice. This is where the story comes home to so many. Throughout America, blended families are challenged by these same things. Step-parents parenting children, caring for them as their own, but repeatedly reminded by forms, paperwork, and statutes that they are not official. Grandparents, aunts and uncles filling in when parents are unable. Families struggling through the messy, complicated yet very real process of making love and law reconcile. The Browns were not isolated from this battle. Even if their tale was shared on television across the nation, they were in all senses a reflection of what so many families silently endure each day. For Robyn, it was emotional on every level. Her past relationship, her children's future, and her new marriage, all of it collided in the courtroom. She had moved forward, but the law had kept one foot planted in her past. And now, with Kody by her side, she was determined to finally close that door. And for Kody, this was his moment of truth. He wasn't merely declaring his love for these children, he was willing to demonstrate it. To stand in front of a judge and promise, with all the gravity that comes with adoption. He wanted to take responsibility not simply in heart, but in law. It's no surprise that viewers were stuck to their seats as this plot played out. Because underneath the cameras and the theatrics of reality television, this was one of those very unusual moments when the story felt common. It wasn't a tale of polygamy or jealousy or family politics. It was about children, love, and the messy path it sometimes takes to build a real and abiding home. When the day at last arrived, and the case did make it to the courtroom, it was as if all of the Browns, Robyn's children's, and Kody's journey had come crashing into that one room. No reality TV cuts here. No dramatic music swells in the background. Just a silence, a heavy near-sacred silence that filled the room like a weight nobody could shrug off. The attorneys, naturally, remained cool. They spoke in carefully measured words, words that sounded cold or mundane to the uninitiated. But beneath those soft words were questions that cut more deeply than any words that could ever find their way into a contract or court document. Was Kody Brown actually prepared to take on this duty? Would the biological father, David Jessup, ever release? And most importantly, what was best for the children? These were not little questions. They were questions with the kind of power to change lives for all eternity. For Kody, it was a test of a lifetime. Sister Wives fans have argued for years about his decision, some hailing his commitment to family, some excoriating his decisions, and questioning his priorities. But for this moment, all the chatter seemed to dissipate. Even those who did not always see eye to eye with him could see the look of determination in his eyes. He wasn't there for display. And he wasn't there for himself. He was there because 3 children needed him to be. Robyn's children, Dayton, Aurora, and Brianna, had already been living with the Brown family. Their daily lives were also entwined with Kody's. They referred to him as a father figure, relied on him for wisdom, and participated in the mundane rituals of family life. He was the one who appeared, the one who was there. But until the court signed those documents, the connection, however genuine in their hearts, always had a cloud looming over it. That shadow revealed itself in innumerable tiny ways. Something as mundane as completing a school registration form became complicated. Medical charts raised issues of guardianship. Legal papers reminded Robyn and her children that in the state's eyes their family was not whole. For the children, it meant living with the silent fear that at any time, their past could rear up to challenge the life they were creating. And that's why today in this courtroom had such amazing significance. The judge overseeing the case wasn't interested in reality television or the opinions of the public. He wasn't interested in online debates between the show's fans. His focus was targeted but significant. The welfare of the children. Judges in such cases bear a great load. They have to balance not just the law, but also the unseen, frequently immeasurable things about family life. What would establish stability? What would best grant these children happiness, security, and belonging? For Robyn and Kody, sitting there together, the air was thick with emotion. Robyn's hands shook slightly as she clasped them together in her lap. She had borne the burden of this process for years, first as a young mother escaping an abusive marriage, then as a woman seeking to merge her life into the already intricate Brown family. She had wished for this adoption for herself, yes, but for her children, so they could finally be a part of the family they were living with in full and complete ways. And then there was the turning point. David Jessup, Robyn's former husband, consented to giving up his parental rights. It was no small concession. For any biological parent, forgoing rights to one's children is huge. It's a step that can be taken only once and never reversed. But David chose to back away, opening the door for Kody to become legally part of the family. The breakthrough did not arrive with pyrotechnics. There were no screams or over-the-top reactions like you see on scripted TV. It was softer, more delicate, nearly holier. The lawyers shared a few rapid-fire words. The judge nodded once, and suddenly, the way was open. And then came the ruling. Under the calm strength of the court, the judge signed off on the adoption. In that instant, the children were no longer merely living as Browns. They were Browns in the eyes of the law. It's difficult to put into words the feelings that swept through the room at that time. Relief, joy, a subdued sense of victory. Robyn's eyes welled with tears, not tears of sadness but of release. Years of anxiety, of living in between, were over at last. Kody straightened his back, as if the weight that had been invisible on his shoulders was gone. And for the kids, even if they hadn't totally understood all the legal details, they knew the essence of it. They belonged now, absolutely and totally to the family they knew. For viewers watching from home, it was one of the most poignant and memorable moments in sister-wives history. This wasn't jealousy between wives, or argument about houses and finances, or even the bigger argument about plural marriage. This was about something much larger, a parent's love for their children, and the extent that they will go to guarantee their future. Even Kody Brown's critics were made to stop and think. Here was a man who had seemed at times controlling, even cavalier about the emotions of his other wives. But today, in this courtroom, all that seemed to matter to him was getting those children. He wanted the responsibility. He wanted the law to understand what his heart already did. And maybe that's what made the moment so strong. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, near gentle. A pen scratched on paper. A judge nodded, and a family was changed forever. In retrospect, it's obvious that this adoption was one of the genuine emotional highlights of the whole series. It was what revealed a side of Kody that was vulnerable, determined, and very human. It revealed Robyn as a strong mother who fought for the security of her children. And it revealed the kids' resilience as they accepted a future that held stability and belonging. As the gavel was brought down, there were no shouts of celebration. There did not have to be. The silence is what spoke volume. It was the silence of peace after an eternity of not knowing, the silence of a family now complete. When the gavel fell, and the adoption was final, it was simple to dismiss it as just another courtroom procedure, another mere formality. But to the Browns, and particularly to Robyn and her two children, this moment contained an importance that had nothing to do with a sheaf of documents in a courthouse. You see, family isn't just about blood. It's about being there, about knowing you've got somebody in your corner no matter what life deals you. And for Robyn's kids, Dayton, Aurora, and Brianna, this adoption guaranteed they would never have to wonder again where they fit in the Brown family. For Robyn, this was the sort of moment that all mothers dream of, but are seldom able to articulate. Since coming to live with the Browns, she had struggled to keep up appearances between her life before and now. She had borne the fear that her children would always be slightly different from the others, that they would always feel stepkids as opposed to really belonging to the family. When the adoption came through, that weight was lifted. Her kids were no longer torn between two homes, no longer torn between custody arrangements and split loyalty. They were Browns, period. And you could see it in Robyn's face. There was relief, there was thanks, and there was a silent sense of closure. It wasn't about wiping away the past. It was about freeing her children to grow into their own future without the shadow of past struggles. Now we know that viewers have varying thoughts regarding Kody Brown. Some perceive him as controlling, while others perceive him as committed, and many question his decisions on everything from relationships to parenting. But in this chapter of his life, Kody revealed a side of himself that even his critics couldn't help but respect. Adopting children isn't an easy path. It's not so much about saying, "I love you like my own." It's about entering into a lifetime of commitment, one that involves legal, financial, and emotional obligations. For Kody, signing on the dotted line was not just putting more names on his already extensive family, it was committing in front of the law, the courts, and the world that he was going to stand by Robyn's kids just as strongly as he stood by his biological children. For a man who frequently spouted words about family cohesion on the show, this was the time where words were turned into action. But maybe the most profound effect of all was experienced by the children themselves. Put yourself in a child's shoes and not know where you really belonged. You have brothers and sisters in your house, the same last name, the same legal father. And while you are loved, you can't help but know that something is not quite right. When the adoption was complete, that line was erased. For Dayton, Aurora, and Brianna, the feeling of being home was no longer in their heads. It was acknowledged by the law. They could stand tall, knowing that their dad wasn't just the man they lived with, or whom they called dad. He was their dad in every official way. This meant no uncertainty at school about who signed papers, no embarrassing questions at the doctor's office regarding guardianship, no second guessing about who would be making decisions if life ever took a curve. The adoption brought certainty, and certainty is one of the strongest things a parent can bestow on a child. So why did this moment resonate so much with viewers, particularly those watching from home who were in their 50s, 60s, or older? Because so many of them had experienced similar struggles. Blended families, second marriages, custody disputes, these are situations for so many Americans. When viewers witnessed Kody and Robyn undergo this ordeal, it wasn't merely reality TV drama. It was something that could be related to. They got the fear of children feeling excluded, the hurt of dealing with ex-husbands/wives in relationships, and the yearning for stability. In that way, this narrative transcended the Browns themselves. It became a reflection of what so many families deal with in their own households. And let's not forget, this adoption took place in a family that was far from simple. Even then, the Brown home was strained with tension. Various wives had different desires, children were divided between multiple homes, and not everyone saw eye to eye on how the family needed to operate. But in this one instant, there was a clarity. For Robyn and her children, for once there was unity. It reminded the world that even in a family as complicated as that of the Browns, love could override all else, and the law would ride in to defend that love. Years on, when fans look back on this plot, it remains one of the most heart-wrenching and significant episodes of Sister Wives. When so much of the series is about drama, arguments, splits, and tears, this was a victory. It reminded everyone that deep down, no matter what else happened, the show was always about family, in its messy, complicated but gorgeous forms. For Robyn, the adoption provided peace of mind. For Kody, it provided an opportunity to demonstrate his commitment. For the kids, it provided stability. And for home viewers, it provided a story that was real, relatable, and most human. Because ultimately, where we are from or what family we have is of little importance, we all desire the same thing: to be loved, to be safe, and to be seen as belonging. And that is why this adoption was so important, not only to the Browns, but to each of us watching who saw something of ourselves in that silent, intense courtroom scene. As the gavel came down in 2015, and the adoption was announced official, it was not merely another day in court. It became a moment that would go down in Sister Wives history. Fans who had watched the Browns through the good times and the bad, through breakups and triumphs, all seemed to stop and appreciate what they had just seen. It wasn't drama, it wasn't bickering, and it wasn't about jealousy. For once, the family assembled and rejoiced in something that was real, something that meant something, children acquiring the safety of a father. Remember the mood in that courtroom, the sobs, the trembling smiles, the relief on Robyn's face, it all spoke volume. Even the other wives, who usually wrestled with their emotions regarding Robyn, couldn't help but enjoy the joy of that moment. Christine, Janelle, and even Mary set aside the usual tensions to acknowledge that this adoption wasn't so much about Robyn, or even about Kody, it was about the children. For the audience, it was a welcome relief. Sister wives had come to be synonymous with never-ending strife, jealousy, distrust, Kody's favoritism, and non-stop arguing over how to keep such a big complicated family in order. But here, in this special moment, the Browns resembled the family they had long professed to be, a cohesive unit. To the audience at home, it was a breath of fresh air. To this day, fans mention the adoption when they are discussing the golden moments of the series. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't controversial, but it was emotional in a way that rang true. Reality TV tends to thrive under chaos, but here the story thrived on love and sacrifice. The scene was memorable because it demonstrated the Browns at their finest, united for children, beyond adult concerns, and validating that family in whatever configuration is worth struggling for. For older audiences in particular, individuals who had raised children, experienced blended family challenges, or coped with divorce and remarriage, the adoption resonated on a profound level. It was real, something they could identify with. In retrospect now, 2015 was a watershed moment in the history of the show, not because everything suddenly improved thereafter, very far from it, but because it was a culmination of togetherness before the storm. Shortly after the adoption, cracks in the Brown family began to widen. Mary's emotional struggles, which later led to her catfishing scandal, were already bubbling under the surface. Christine was becoming increasingly vocal about her unhappiness and her sense of being overlooked. Janelle was trying to keep the peace, but even she was starting to feel the pressure. And then there was Robyn. For her, the adoption was a dream come true. But for the other wives, the whole experience served to remind them of just how much Kody was willing to give up for Robyn, and how different his relationship with her was from the rest. In retrospect, the adoption became symbolic, not only of togetherness, but also of the start of the rift that would ultimately tear the family apart. For Kody, the adoption was confirmation of his love for Robyn. He had formally divorced Mary, his first wife, so that he could marry Robyn and make this adoption a reality. That move was huge. Although Mary publicly endorsed it at the time, viewers understood that it cut deep. The adoption made Robyn's position not only in the family, but in Kody's life as his official wife and the mother of his officially sanctioned children. From then on, numerous viewers started to observe what they termed favoritism. Kody was more committed, more protective, and more loving with Robyn than with his other wives. Some supporters contend that this court victory was the moment the other wives felt left behind. To Robyn's kids, the adoption provided them with something beyond a fresh last name or legal status. It provided them with stability in years when the Brown home was growing less stable. While Kody's marriages to Mary, Janelle, and Christine were crumbling, Robyn's children could sleep at night knowing that no matter what, Kody belonged to them. And this is where the legacy of that adoption truly glows. As adults' marriages dissolved, as sister-wife relationships dissolved, as the family experienced scandal after scandal, that adoption was unscathed. No one questioned, no one apologized for it. It served as a constant reminder that at least once, the Browns had done something right. Flash forward a few years, and the Brown family barely resembled their former selves. Christine departed in 2021. Janelle finally did too. Mary lasted the longest, but even she eventually conceded. The proud plural marriage once went was now nothing but shambles, with only Kody and Robyn remaining. Amidst all that destruction, the adoption was a beacon of light. The fans found themselves looking back at 2015 as the last good moment, the moment the family actually did look like they were in this together. It was a sweet and bitter thing, because although the adoption was a triumph, it also served to remind the family what they might have been, had they been able to keep that sense of togetherness alive. For audiences, the adoption wasn't simply part of the Brown family narrative. It became symbolic of something greater. It demonstrated that in even the most complex families, acts of selflessness and love can overcome. It demonstrated that the law, characteristically cold and unforgiving, can also be an agent of healing and belonging. Viewers who had navigated divorces, second marriages, step-parenting, or custody disputes could identify with this moment. They understood the drama, the sacrifices, and the sense of relief that came with finally becoming a family again. That's why today, years after the fact, people reminisce about it as one of the most impactful episodes in the series' long run. So what has been the legacy of that 2015 adoption? It's double-edged. On the one hand, it was the greatest expression of what the Browns pretended to believe: unity, sacrifice, and non-biological love. On the other hand, it is where the unraveling started. For the sacrifices Kody made for Robyn solidified the fissures in him and his other wives. But whatever your allegiance, whether you are rooting for Robyn, or feeling sorry for Christine, Janelle, or Mary, one thing is clear: that adoption was a blessing for the children. And ultimately, children are what are most important. To Sister Wives viewers, the adoption episode is not merely a plot point. It's a reminder of why they originally watched: to see a family attempt to find love, law, and loyalty in a world that often didn't get it. And although the Brown family later fell apart, the record of that day in 2015 remains a rare golden moment of victory. Because long after the cameras stop rolling, what remains isn't the drama or the scandal. It's the lives that were changed, the children who were given security, and the truth that sometimes in the midst of chaos, love and law really can come together to create something lasting.